What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So Ta-Nehisi's Black Panther for All New, All Different Marvel is one of the best stories coming out of Marvel right now, and there's no two ways about it. I mean, this story is amazing, and here's the reason why. Historically speaking, Black Panther has had a very long history, very lengthy and rich history, only insofar as him being part of a superhero team. He was a major character in the Marvel community because he was like the first major black superhero in Marvel Comics. And because of that, it set the stage for Storm and, Sam Wilson and Luke Cage and all those different guys. But there were only like glimpses that we ever got of Wakanda, unless it was like a backup feature or unless it was something where the Fantastic Four or the Avengers or Captain America traveled to Wakanda. We almost never learned about his home territory. The only time we ever really saw anything going on with Wakanda, and even then the villains that we saw, the only real expansion that we had was if like M'Baku, Man-Ape, was like trying to take over Wakanda, usurp the throne of King from T'Challa and cast him out, or if someone like Eric Killmonger was trying to get rid of Black Panther. That was really about it. Now, a lot of that changed in the 1990s with Black Panther Volume 3 when we had Christopher Priest take over the title. The issue here was that Christopher Priest focused more on like the political storytelling of Wakanda, more so than expanding the history of Wakanda itself. He did to a degree, but it was always like what Black Panther was doing in the United States, or what Black Panther was doing in Wakanda in a small section of it. What Ta-Nehisi does here is he shows us that there's trouble in paradise, that yes, Black Panther is a king, but there's a lot more to being a king than just being a guy who runs the show. And that's the coolest thing here. Now, something to keep in mind is that Ta-Nehisi's writing comes out of the events before Secret Wars. So, we're talking about stories where Doctor Doom invaded Wakanda. We're talking about the Cabal, the Black Order of Thanos when they invaded Wakanda. We're talking about Avengers versus X-Men when Namor the Submariner flooded Wakanda. There were a lot of events that took place here that really impacted Wakanda in such a way that it left a bad taste in everybody's mouths and people began to question T'Challa himself. Now, no event was more significant than the death of Shuri, because at the time when she died, she had effectively replaced Black Panther as ruler of Wakanda. And during the events leading up to Secret Wars, as part of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, where he was able to bolster things, introduce stuff like Necrosha, the City of the Dead, Black Panther communicating with the ghosts of past Black Panthers that were part of the ruling monarchy in Wakanda itself. Shuri had basically sacrificed her life. She had paved the way for as many people to escape as they could, or at least for Black Panther and its sources to escape, while she stayed behind and effectively died. Because of that, people in a lot of ways, the people within Wakanda itself looked to him as a coward. They looked to him as a person who wasn't effectively a king. Now, what that means will be explored later on. And in fact, there's a beautifully crafted conversation between a woman named Ramonda and T'Challa himself, where she basically says, how you've been acting as a king is not what gets people to believe that you're a king. It makes them think you're a king, but they don't believe it in their heart of hearts. They just say, yes, he's king. Now, the cool thing about this is we initially start off with Ta-Nehisi basically showing us that there is trouble here, that T'Challa in Wakanda right now is effectively dealing with the early stages of insurrection, that there is really right now at this moment an organization called the People that's effectively launching a series of terrorist attacks. Now, the way they launch these attacks are simply done by a woman who's just effectively bringing out the emotions that people already have and then using that for them to carry out a multitude of different acts. So where this group called the People will carry out acts in and of themselves, it's easier to basically get Wakandans to commit these acts on their own. Now, it's really just them rebelling, it's them, refusing to work, or it's them, effectively lashing out at Black Panther by way of just tearing things up. But the fact remains here that it's effectively creating this kind of rift in Wakanda itself to where the people of Wakanda don't quite have the same faith in Black Panther that they used to. Now, at this point, we switch over to the capital of Wakanda, to the Golden City, as it's referred to. Now, this is actually extremely important because in this particular instance, there's basically a young woman named Anika who's essentially being put on trial here. And the reason why is because there was a chieftain in a part of Wakanda who was essentially going around and abusing women in different ways. And because of this, Anika had basically spoken up. She said, hey, you can't do this. When the chieftain ignored her, she killed him for it. Now, the reason why she did that is because this chieftain was dishonoring the mothers, the sisters, the daughters of various people from around Wakanda. And because of that, the only way to deal with such dishonor that was unrepentant was to kill the person who was doing that. Now, the woman who's making this case, who's pleading this argument, is a girl named Ayo, and she's actually part of a group called the Dora Milaje, I think is how you pronounce it. But this is basically the personal guard of T'Challa. It's really kind of, referred to as like his adored ones, basically the ones above all others. So whenever you see like an image or a panel from Black Panther Volume 3, where you have T'Challa, like during the first story arc of Black Panther Volume 3 called The Client, where T'Challa travels to North America, the people who are with him, that's part of that group. Now, the girl Ayo who's making this case is basically saying, hey, look, she was standing up for the honor of others. The issue here is that Ramonda is effectively overseeing all this. Now, again, Ramonda will get some measure of explanation here in a second, but where Ayo says you have to let her go because she's standing up for the honor of someone, you cannot simply condemn her for that. Ramonda says, yes, we do, because that is the law of the land. The law of the land must be maintained. If we make an exception for her, we have to make an exception for somebody else. And then the problem becomes the line drawing. Now, following this, where Anika she's not really executed so much as she's held prisoner until she's executed, we basically pick up with the arrival of T'Challa here, where he starts talking with Ramonda. And what we learn here is that Ramonda is the second wife of his father T'Chaka, but she is as much his mother as his biological mother. Now keep in mind, the biological mother of T'Challa had basically died in childbirth, but Ramonda's not a new creation. She's been around since like Marvel Premiere number 4, number 22, something like that, I can't remember. But she's been around for a long time, since the 1960s, I think, since the late 1960s. But she's been a major part of the Black Panther mythos for quite some time. The issue is that what Tanasi is going to do here is he's basically going to really flesh her out more than she's ever been fleshed out before. Now, what we also learned from Black Panther is that this particular woman who was using her powers to incite revolution is, again, part of this group called the People. Not only that, Ramonda begins sitting down with Black Panther and saying, hey, look, you have to look at things from their perspective. From the people of Wakanda, it's been nothing but a series of problems, regicide, when Shuri was killed. You've had cataclysms where, again, Namor the Submariner flooded Wakanda, where Necrosha was destroyed by Thanos. I mean, you have all these major issues that are taking place, and because of that, the people have basically lost faith in him. Now, in the midst of all this, while this conversation is going on, we essentially have Ayo basically leave the royal guard of Black Panther, basically abandon it, and then rescue Anika. And this is really when we learn that the two of them have a very close relationship. More so than that, they've basically come to the conclusion that there are a lot of people out there who are being used for whatever reason. Existing chieftains, these rural leaders, are essentially abusing their power, but T'Challa's not doing anything to stop them. And so in their mind, T'Challa's basically abandoned them as their king. He's walked away from it. Now, this is not necessarily the case, but again, T'Challa's effectively coming back to all this after Secret Wars, because remember, T'Challa remembers everything during the events of Secret Wars. When the multiverse was basically reset by Reed Richards, T'Challa was holding on to the Reality Stone, and so he remembers the way everything was prior to Secret Wars, during Secret Wars, and even now. And so in his mind, he's trying to cope with this entire situation, as well as cope with the fact that his sister's dead, and come to grips with the circumstance. Now, from here, Ta-Nehisi Coates gets a little interesting in terms of his method of storytelling. And the reason why is because we, again, get to see a little bit more expansion here, but we also learn that T'Challa is continuing to struggle with the fact that there are people who are trying to effectively revolt against him. But what Ta-Nehisi Coates also does is offer a little bit of a retcon. This is why I say his storytelling gets a little interesting, because historically speaking, in terms of the chronology of Marvel Comics and in continuity, Eric Killmonger was a long-standing villain of Black Panther, and it constantly tried to eliminate him and take his place as ruler of Wakanda. The issue with this was that originally he was basically defeated by Monica Rambeau. However, what Ta-Nehisi Coates does here is he says, no, that's not the case. Instead, what he says is that as part of this organization called the People, this woman that's basically using her powers to manipulate the emotions of others is a girl named Zenzi, and that she was essentially the one that led to the death of Eric Killmonger by manipulating the emotions of the people around him and having them go insane and attack one another. And so it was essentially Ta-Nehisi Coates saying she was the reason why Eric Killmonger died. Now, that's not the biggest retcon in the world, but it also does go to show that to a degree, this is all new, all different Marvel. And so while not everything is all new and all different, it does give existing writers a chance to switch things up a bit, to change things around, to offer some different suggestions from here and there on what's happening. Now, at this point, we basically switch over to a bandit compound in northern Wakanda. And again, this is really, Ayo and Anika forming their own organization. And essentially what they do is they break into this bandit camp where these different women are being held captive for the purpose of these bandits using them for their own purposes. And the result is that Anika and Ayo basically free all of them. Now, in this process, while they're going through all this and they're fighting all these different foes, they also begin to come to the idea that no one man should be in charge of Wakanda, that Wakanda should basically basically be a country ruled by the people and for the people. Now, this creates an interesting situation because again, with the exception of villains like Eric Killmonger or M'Baku, we had no reason to believe that anybody within Wakanda would try to rise up and cast off Black Panther just because of the fact that as far as previous stories went, the people revered him as a leader. This is the reason why Ta-Nehisi Coates' writing is so cool, because what it's showing us is that there are consequences for all the things that's happened. Where we would look at comic books and we would say, well, I mean, you have Civil War and you got Secret Invasion and you got, this and World Breaker Hulk and all that kind of stuff. Well, those events just happen and nothing really comes of it. There's a little bit of mistrust, but at the end of the day, the superheroes always come back and win. What Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying is, no. It doesn't work that way. Even if it's only within Wakanda itself, all the cataclysms that have taken place here, all the problems that they face, all the struggles, all the issues that have gone on, it does not go unnoticed. And much like a house that's being chipped away bit by bit, this is a scenario where these different cataclysms have just been chipping away at the trust that the Wakandan people have towards Black Panther. And the result is that they just don't see him as being a capable leader anymore. They don't see him as somebody who can basically be their king. Now again, we'll get to that discussion here in a second in terms of why, with regards to their own personal motivations and in their heart of hearts. But at this point, we basically switch over to Ta-Nehisi Coates building the plot lines for a bigger story later on. And what this does is it actually picks up with the idea of Shuri. We normally would have thought that Shuri was dead, and to a degree she was. I mean, it was verified that she was dead in New Avengers number 29, I think, when we basically saw her spirit among all the other spirits of the Wakandan leaders of the past. But us picking up with her character, we basically join her in the Jalia, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm not really familiar with a lot of words that are of African dialects, so hopefully I pronounce it correctly. But it's basically the plane of Wakandan memory. Now, this is a really cool concept because within the Wakandan mythos and really the Black Panther mythos, there have been small expansions here and there, but nothing like this. The only thing that we ever really saw when it came to the idea of like an afterlife, it came to the idea of other beings, leaders, people who had touched with Black Panther from the past, only really came in the form of really the Panther god Bast and what Hickman did with Necrosha and the former leaders of Wakanda communing with Black Panther. That was about it. What we get here is this whole cool plane of memory. We'll get to that here in a second, but it's really this idea, this general purpose that all the memory of Wakanda rests within this plane. And it's going to be somewhat of a return of familiarity. But at this point, again, we basically switch back to northern Wakanda and to the border of the Jabari lands. Now, the cool thing about this is, again, picking up with Ayo and Anika, this is just another situation where they're bolstering their ranks, because what they do is they sit down and they essentially say, we cannot fight this fight on our own. Between the two of us, we cannot do this. Not simply because of the fact that it's just the two of us and there are so many people out there, but because of the fact that if Black Panther finds out what we're doing, he will capture and kill us, and he can easily take out the two of us by himself. What we need is an army. What we need are a force of people who view everything the same way we do, and we can have that force of people rally to our cause, and we can cast off Black Panther and replace him with a just and fair method of ruling. Now again, switching back over to Shuri, to the sister of Black Panther, I love this bit of writing. I mean, this is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing here, because it really touches with the history of Wakanda, and I really like this is being built up, because what's happening is Shuri's basically speaking with this caretaker, so to speak, of the land of Wakandan memory. And it's really this idea that this caretaker basically says, you were a leader of Wakanda, and in a lot of ways, you were a better leader than Black Panther than your brother was. And the reason why is because you, to some degree, recognize the value, the intrinsic nature, the history of Wakanda, but Shuri didn't fully grasp it. And that's what this caretaker says is, we are going to remind you of the beauty of Wakanda. You're going to get back in touch with the old ways. Now, this is a beautiful dichotomy, and the reason why I say that is because since his introduction into Marvel Comics, Black Panther's main emphasis has been his intelligence and Wakanda's technological advancement. That's really been like the main focal point. Wakanda has the Great Mound, the giant store of vibranium that almost no one has access to except for those that Wakanda chooses to give a sample to, like in the instance of Captain America when his shield was created. But with the exception of that, no one really has access to it. More so than that, it was always the technological advancement of Wakanda, but it wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on the nature of Wakanda. What's beyond the technological advancement? Once you get down into the roots, once you get into the land itself, what is the basis behind it? That's what Ta-Nehisi is basically exploring here. It's this idea of the history of Wakanda. That Wakanda had this rich, powerful history long before vibranium showed up, and it'll have the rich, powerful history, presuming somewhere along the line, somebody takes all that vibranium. And so again, from here, we really switch over to Black Panther as he's continuing his hunt for Zinzi, and ultimately he comes across her. The problem is that he also comes across a guy named Tetu, I think it is, or Titu, and he's basically this guy who's working alongside Zinzi. Now, again, this is a guy that basically invokes magic. It's really just kind of like control of the land is really what he does. His powers seem to be more akin to like Black Tom Cassidy, for those of you guys who remember that far back. But the idea here is that he basically tells Black Panther, you're a failure of a king. With all the calamities that we've had, all the destruction that we've faced, where were you? Where were you when Necrosha came crashing down? Where were you when Dr. Doom invaded Wakanda? Where were you when Namor the Submariner flooded Wakanda? Where were you during all these major calamities? You were off with the Avengers. You were off gallivanting around with people who were not Wakandan born. And essentially what he's saying is you've abandoned your heritage. Now, there is some very powerful messages coming out of this, because what Tetsu's really doing is echoing the sentiment of existing Wakandans that, yeah, sure, if Black Panther is their king, yeah, sure, Black Panther is part of the monarchy, he's of royal blood, but he's not acting like a king. He's acting like a guy who's just there for a while, who's just occupying a space and just going through the motions and doing whatever it is that a king does. It's almost like one of these circumstances where he would rather be on the Avengers team. He would rather be off in space fighting some foe or trying to deal with Thanos when he's got some, insane scheme going on, but he doesn't really want to be a king. Now, the reason why this is important is because following the escape of Tetsu and Zenzi, we basically have Black Panther sitting down and talking with Ramonda, basically talking with his mother. Now, she says this is exactly right. Like what Tutu is saying is essentially right. He's making a legitimate claim here that the difference between being a king and people believing you're a king is inspiration. It's not enough to just be the guy in charge. It's not enough to be the guy that people look up to. You have to inspire them. You have to give them a reason to believe in you. And that is the most important thing here. And the reason for that, I guess a really perfect example of that is like World War II Japan. The Japanese people would have laid down their lives for Hirohito. That's why we dropped atomic bombs instead of invading, because they would have fought to the last man, woman, and child. That's essentially what Ramonda's talking about here with Black Panther. Of course, she doesn't invoke World War II or anything like that, but she's saying the people have to believe in you. They have to truly believe in their heart of hearts that you're looking out for them, that you're doing the best that you can. Because if you don't, then all they're going to do is see a series of calamities and they're going to see that you don't care. And so she says, if you want to prevent more of these major crises, if you want to keep more of these things from happening, then you have to convince the people to believe in you. And so that when someone comes along like Zenzi and she uses her power to bring out their utmost emotions, that in the end, they turn against her because their strongest emotion is love for T'Challa, love for Black Panther. The issue with this is that while he's going through and while he's spending time with these people, while he has this major ceremony and he's talking to all of his subordinates, there's a massive explosion in the background. And when this massive explosion is done, when it all begins to clear up, there's massive casualties across the board. Even Ramonda herself, the mother of Black Panther, is severely injured. And so because of this, he sits down with his council and basically says, this is an act of war. And I want to know who's behind it, because once we find out who's behind it, we're going to go through and we're going to kill them all. And so what Ta-Nehisi's basically doing here, at least what it seems like he's doing here, is saying, hey, here's a really cool story that just shows you kind of a follow-up from the events from before Secret Wars with regards to all the invasions and all the calamities and so on and so forth. Here's how all that panned out with regards to Wakanda. And here is Black Panther basically going through, thinning the herd, trimming the fat, getting rid of all these insurrectionist groups, and then presumably going forward, having a better understanding of what it means to actually be a king. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best Black Panther story ever told. Like it's amazing. It's only book one. I think it's divided into like 3 or 4 books, but they're basically volumes is essentially what they are, but it's extremely well written. I'd highly suggest you check it out if you ever get a chance. But yeah, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.